Welcome to Just Stories. We hope you enjoy the story. The First Sino-Japanese War, Clash of Empires in East Asia, by Just Stories. Chapter 1, Origins of Conflict, Tensions in East Asia before 1894. Welcome to the first chapter of our book, The First Sino-Japanese War, Clash of Empires in East Asia. In this chapter, we will explore the historical, cultural, and economic factors that contributed to the strained relations between China and Japan in the late 19th century. The origins of the conflict can be traced back to the mid-19th century, when China was ruled by the Qing Dynasty and Japan was emerging from centuries of isolation under the Tokugawa shogunate. As Japan began to modernize and engage with the outside world, it became increasingly aware of its vulnerability to foreign powers and the need to expand its influence in the region. At the same time, China was struggling to maintain its dominance in East Asia, facing pressure from Western colonial powers and internal rebellions. This led to a period of rapid change and unrest, as both countries sought to assert their interests and protect their sovereignty. One of the key factors that fueled tensions between China and Japan was the issue of territorial claims. Both countries saw themselves as rightful heirs to the legacy of Chinese civilization and culture, and each claimed historical ties to the Korean peninsula and other neighboring regions. In particular, Korea was a major flashpoint for conflict between China and Japan. In the late 19th century, Korea was a weak and divided country, with a government that was heavily influenced by China. Japan saw Korea as a potential ally and trading partner, and began to assert its influence over the country through diplomatic and economic means. However, China viewed any foreign intervention in Korea as a threat to its own interests, and was determined to maintain its dominance over the country. This led to a series of diplomatic and military clashes between China and Japan, as each side sought to protect its own interests in Korea. Another factor that contributed to the tension between China and Japan was the issue of trade and economic relations. China was a major market for Japanese goods, particularly silk and tea, but the trade balance was heavily in China's favor. This led to a growing sense of resentment among Japanese leaders, who felt that China was taking advantage of Japan's economic dependence. In addition, Japan was seeking to expand its own economic influence in the region, particularly in Southeast Asia. This put it in direct competition with China, which also saw the region as a vital source of resources and trade opportunities. Finally, nationalism played a major role in fueling the tensions between China and Japan. Both countries saw themselves as culturally and politically superior to their neighbors, and this sense of pride and superiority led to a deep-seated mistrust and suspicion of the other. In Japan, this nationalism was fueled by the idea of Datsue-ran, or leaving Asia, a belief that Japan needed to break away from the influence of China and embrace a more global perspective. Meanwhile, in China, nationalism was growing in response to the encroachment of Western powers and the need to assert Chinese sovereignty. These various factors, territorial claims, economic competition, and nationalism, all contributed to the growing tensions between China and Japan in the late 19th century. They set the stage for the conflict that would erupt in 1894, as both sides sought to protect their interests and assert their dominance in East Asia. In the next chapter, we will explore the opening shots of the war and the initial military engagements between China and Japan. We hope you will join us on this journey as we delve deeper into the history and legacy of the First Sino-Japanese War. Chapter 2, The Battle for Korea, Opening Shots of the War. Welcome to Chapter 2 of our book, The First Sino-Japanese War, Clash of Empires in East Asia. In this chapter, we will explore the initial military engagements between China and Japan, focusing on the battle for Korea. The First Sino-Japanese War began in July 1894, when Japanese forces invaded Korea in an effort to assert their influence over the country. Korea had long been a vassal state of China, but Japan saw it as a potential ally and trading partner, and was determined to protect its interests in the region. The Japanese forces, under the command of General Oyama Iwao, quickly seized control of the Korean capital of Seoul and began to push southward towards the port city of Busan. Meanwhile, Chinese forces, under the command of General Liaodong, mobilized to counter the Japanese invasion and protect their own interests in Korea. The first major engagement of the war took place on September 17, 1894, near the Yalu River on the border between Korea and China. The Chinese fleet, consisting of 8 battleships and a number of smaller vessels, engaged the Japanese fleet, which was smaller but better armed and trained. The ensuing battle, known as the Battle of the Yalu River, was a decisive victory for the Japanese. Their modernized navy and superior firepower overwhelmed the Chinese fleet, sinking or capturing 7 of the 8 Chinese battleships. The Battle of the Yalu River marked a turning point in the war, giving the Japanese a significant advantage in the conflict. It also demonstrated the effectiveness of Japan's modernization efforts and highlighted the weaknesses of China's outdated military technology and tactics. Following the battle, the Japanese forces continued their advance southward through Korea, encountering only limited resistance from Chinese troops. However, the Chinese were not content to simply cede control of Korea to the Japanese and began to mobilize their army for a counterattack. The two sides clashed again on October 25, 1894, at the Battle of Pyongyang. This time, the Chinese forces were better prepared and managed to repel the Japanese advance and push them back towards Seoul. However, the Chinese victory was short-lived. The Japanese regrouped and launched a counteroffensive, retaking Pyongyang and pushing further northward towards the Chinese border. In January 1895, the two sides met again at the Battle of Weihai Wei, a naval engagement off the coast of Shandong province in China. The battle was another decisive victory for the Japanese, who sank or captured almost the entire Chinese fleet, effectively ending China's naval power and ensuring Japanese control of the seas. The battle for Korea was a critical phase of the First Sino-Japanese War, setting the stage for the rest of the conflict. It demonstrated the military prowess of the Japanese and the weaknesses of the Chinese army and navy, and gave the Japanese a significant advantage in the war. In the next chapter, we will explore the turning points of the war, including the key naval battles and diplomatic breakthroughs that shaped the outcome of the conflict. We hope you will continue to join us on this journey as we delve deeper into the history and legacy of the First Sino-Japanese War. Chapter 3: The Turning Points, Naval Battles, and Diplomatic Breakthroughs. Welcome to Chapter 3 of our book, The First Sino-Japanese War, Clash of Empires in East Asia. In this chapter, we will explore the turning points of the war, including the key naval battles and diplomatic breakthroughs that shaped the outcome of the conflict. Following the battle for Korea, the First Sino-Japanese War entered a new phase, with both sides seeking to gain the upper hand through military and diplomatic means. One of the most significant turning points of the war was the Battle of the Yellow Sea, which took place on August 10, 1895. The battle pitted the Japanese Navy, under the command of Admiral Ito Tsukuki, against the Chinese Navy, commanded by Admiral Ding Ruchang. The battle was fought near the mouth of the Yellow Sea, off the coast of China's Shandong Peninsula. The two fleets engaged in a fierce naval battle that lasted for several hours, with the Japanese ultimately emerging victorious. The Battle of the Yellow Sea was a significant victory for the Japanese, as it effectively ended China's naval power and ensured Japanese control of the seas. This allowed Japan to blockade Chinese ports and restrict Chinese access to vital trade routes, crippling China's economy and further weakening its military capabilities. With their naval power effectively neutralized, the Chinese were forced to turn to diplomatic means to end the war. In April 1895, representatives from China and Japan met in the city of Shimonoseki to negotiate a peace treaty. The treaty, signed on April 17, 1895, was a significant victory for Japan. China was forced to recognize Korea as an independent state and cede Taiwan, the Pescadores Islands, and the Liaodong Peninsula to Japan. In addition, China was required to pay a large indemnity to Japan and open several ports to Japanese trade. The Shimonoseki Treaty marked the end of the First Sino-Japanese War and set the stage for Japan's emergence as a major power in East Asia. It also had significant repercussions for China, leading to widespread anger and frustration among the Chinese people and fueling nationalist movements that would shape Chinese politics for decades to come. In the years following the war, Japan continued to expand its influence in the region, including through the annexation of Korea in 1910 and its participation in World War II. Meanwhile, China faced internal turmoil, including the collapse of the Qing Dynasty and the rise of the Chinese Communist Party. The turning points of the First Sino-Japanese War had far-reaching implications for the political, economic, and social landscape of East Asia. They demonstrated the growing power and influence of Japan, and the weaknesses of China's imperial system. They also set the stage for future conflicts and tensions in the region. In the next chapter, we will explore the impact and aftermath of the First Sino-Japanese War, including its lasting effects on East Asian politics, society, and culture. We hope you will continue to join us on this journey as we delve deeper into the history and legacy of this pivotal moment in East Asian history. Chapter 4: Impact and Aftermath Repercussions of the First Sino-Japanese War. Welcome to Chapter 4 of our book, The First Sino-Japanese War, Clash of Empires in East Asia. In this chapter, we will explore the lasting effects of the war on East Asian politics, society, and culture. The First Sino-Japanese War was a pivotal moment in the history of East Asia, with far-reaching implications for the region and beyond. The war marked the emergence of Japan as a major power in the region and signaled the decline of China's imperial system. One of the most immediate impacts of the war was the loss of territory and prestige for China. The Shimonoseki Treaty forced China to recognize the independence of Korea and cede Taiwan, the Pescadores Islands, and the Liaodong Peninsula to Japan. This loss of territory and influence dealt a blow to China's national pride and contributed to a sense of frustration and anger among the Chinese people. The war also had significant economic repercussions for China. The indemnity imposed by Japan following the war, combined with the loss of territory and trade routes, further weakened China's already struggling economy. This set the stage for further exploitation and intervention by foreign powers in China in the years to come. For Japan, the war marked a significant step towards its emergence as a major power in the region. The victory over China demonstrated the effectiveness of Japan's modernization efforts and its military and technological prowess. It also gave Japan control over key trade routes and resources, allowing it to expand its influence in the region and beyond. However, the war also had significant consequences for Japan. The cost of the war, both in terms of resources and human life, was high. The conflict also led to a deepening of nationalist sentiments in Japan, fueling a sense of pride and superiority that would have significant implications for Japanese politics and foreign policy in the years to come. The First Sino-Japanese War also had broader implications for East Asian politics and society. The war highlighted the growing influence of Western powers in the region, and the ways in which colonialism and imperialism were reshaping the balance of power. It also set the stage for future conflicts and tensions in the region, including the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Pacific War. The war had significant cultural and social implications as well. The conflict fueled nationalist movements in both China and Japan, contributing to a sense of identity and pride that would shape the political and social landscape of both countries. It also had an impact on literature, art, and other cultural expressions, influencing the way in which East Asian societies viewed themselves and their place in the world. In conclusion, the First Sino-Japanese War was a pivotal moment in the history of East Asia, with far-reaching implications for the region and beyond. The loss of territory and prestige for China, and the emergence of Japan as a major power, set the stage for future conflicts and tensions in the region. The war also had significant cultural and social implications, contributing to the emergence of nationalism and shaping the way in which East Asian societies viewed themselves and their place in the world. Chapter 5: Legacy and Lessons Remembering the First Sino-Japanese War. Welcome to Chapter 5 of our book, The First Sino-Japanese War, Clash of Empires in East Asia. In this chapter, we will reflect on the legacy of the war and the lessons that can be drawn from its causes, conduct, and consequences. The First Sino-Japanese War had a significant impact on the history of East Asia, setting the stage for future conflicts and tensions in the region. The war marked the emergence of Japan as a major power and the decline of China's imperial system. It also had significant cultural and social implications, fueling nationalist movements in both China and Japan and shaping the way in which East Asian societies viewed themselves and their place in the world. One of the key lessons that can be drawn from the First Sino-Japanese War is the importance of modernization and adaptation. Japan's victory over China was due in large part to its efforts to modernize its military, economy, and society in the late 19th century. By adopting Western technology and organizational structures, Japan was able to gain a significant advantage over China, whose imperial system was outdated and ill-equipped to face the challenges of the modern world. At the same time, the war also highlights the dangers of nationalism and the ways in which it can fuel conflict and aggression. The nationalist sentiments that emerged in both China and Japan during the war contributed to a sense of pride and superiority that fueled tensions between the two countries. This demonstrates the need for diplomacy and cooperation, as well as the dangers of letting nationalism and pride dictate foreign policy. Another lesson from the First Sino-Japanese War is the importance of balance of power in international relations. The conflict demonstrated the ways in which imbalances in power can contribute to conflict and aggression. It also highlighted the importance of diplomacy and negotiation in resolving conflicts, as well as the role that alliances and treaties can play in maintaining stability and peace. Finally, the First Sino-Japanese War underscores the importance of historical memory and commemoration. The war had a significant impact on the political, social, and cultural landscape of East Asia, and it is important to remember and reflect on its legacy in order to better understand the region's history and identity. By studying the causes, conduct, and consequences of the war, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complex forces that shape East Asian politics and society. In conclusion, the First Sino-Japanese War was a pivotal moment in the history of East Asia, with far-reaching implications for the region and beyond. The war underscores the importance of modernization, diplomacy, balance of power, and historical memory in shaping international relations and resolving conflicts. By studying and reflecting on the lessons of the war, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complex dynamics that shape our world today. Thank you for watching our story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss out on our next video.